There's an occupational hazard of being a divine feminine, and that occupational hazard is that people can become so accustomed to your ability to regenerate that they forget that regeneration is not the same thing as invulnerability. The divine feminine gets back to her life, always, unbothered, unfuckwittable. She rebuilds, she heals, she creates again, she returns to the garden, and because she has done this so many times, people can begin to underestimate the significance of what she has survived. They begin to undermine and underestimate her feminine nature and how hard this really has been. They see the glow, they see the relaxed spirit, they see the garden growing around her, but they don't always see what it took to get there. This dehumanizes the divine feminine in subtle and bold ways. Sometimes the omen is not that something terrible is about to happen. Sometimes the omen is that something that has been quietly destabilizing your life is finally becoming visible. A broken promise, an unfulfilled obligation, a relationship that promised stability but repeatedly produced instability, a partnership that sounded secure until it required actual accountability, a person who wanted access to your energy but couldn't sustain responsibility with that access. And this is where the divine feminine has to become very discerning. Because your ability to heal does not mean you are supposed to remain in environments that continually require you to heal. Your ability to recover does not mean other people are entitled to keep creating conditions that you have to recover from. And your strength does not mean your health, your safety, your creative life, or your peace become expendable or replaceable. This is where the subtle intelligence of the divine feminine becomes powerful. She notices, she watches, she doesn't necessarily need to make an announcement. She can see when the reality of something no longer matches the stability that was promised. She can feel when a person, place, practice, partnership, or environment is asking her to compromise something essential just to maintain the appearance of harmony. And eventually, she asks a very simple question: is this actually supporting my life? Did they promise? Did they mean well? Could this become something different one day? What is actually producing in my life? Because that is where the illusion ends. The divine feminine is not simply a sacred elixir because she makes everything around her beautiful. She is sacred because she can transform what happens to her into wisdom. She can take rejection and turn it into discernment. She can take a disappointment and turn it into standards. She can take a broken promise and learn to recognize the difference between potential and reliability. She can lose something and still recover herself. And sometimes that is the part that other people never anticipated. They thought losing their participation in your life would diminish you. They thought that rejection would stop you. They thought disruption would make you abandon your path. But the divine feminine returns. She returns to her work. She returns to her creativity. She returns to her body and her spirit. She returns to the things that make her feel alive, like her garden. And sometimes she returns without the people who were standing in it before. That is the turning point. Because healing is not always reconciliation, and it's definitely not linear. Sometimes healing is simply becoming unwilling to confuse instability with intimacy anymore. Sometimes sovereignty is not a dramatic departure. Sometimes it's the quiet realization: this no longer belongs in my life. And that is why I think this is a divine feminine omen. Not because the divine feminine never faces rejection. She absolutely does. Not because she never experiences heartbreak, disappointment, or broken promises. She does. Her power is that rejection does not become the final authority over her life. She learns, she regenerates, and she becomes more discerning as she continues. The people who cannot fulfill their promises may remain attached to the consequences of those choices, but the divine feminine has somewhere else to be, back to her life, back to her creativity, back to her health, back to her sovereign garden. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: you do not have to prove your healing by returning to the place where you were wounded. Sometimes the greatest evidence of your infinite healing power is simply that you choose a life that no longer requires you to abandon yourself in order to keep it.